I hadn't been back to the house on Harrow Ridge since we put Gran in the ground 11 years ago, and standing at the end of the driveway in the gray October light, I understood immediately why I'd been in no hurry. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Memory had kept it large, a place of long hallways and tall ceilings and rooms that felt big enough to hold a whole summer inside them. What I was looking at now was just an old house on a dirt road, 2 stories of faded white paint gone gray with age, shutters the color of weathered moss, a porch that sagged on the left side where the support post had begun to work loose from the beam. The driveway was overgrown, grass pushing up through the gravel in long pale clumps, and the trees on either side had grown in closer than they'd been, the branches of birch and spruce nearly touching overhead in places, so that the whole approach felt less like a driveway and more like a channel cut through something slowly closing back up. I sat with the engine running for a moment and looked at it. The estate lawyer had given me 2 days. Inventory the contents, photograph anything of value, compile a list for the estate sale company. The legal complications had taken 11 years to untangle. Some issue with the deed, a distant cousin who contested something and then died himself before anything was resolved. The house had been sitting closed and empty the whole time, utilities kept on by court order to maintain the structure, property taxes paid from the estate account. Just sitting at the end of this overgrown driveway, waiting. I put the car in drive and went up. The second porch step gave a sharp crack under my foot, soft in the middle. I noted it and moved on. The third key on Gran's ring fit the front door. I pushed it open and the smell of the house came out at me. Old wood, cold ash, the particular damp and dry smell of a building that had been closed for years. And something under it I couldn't name right away. Something faint. I stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind me. The front hall was dim. The wallpaper was a faded blue stripe I remembered, peeling now at the seams and upper corners. The wide plank floors were dull with years of dust, undisturbed. I stood for a moment and let my eyes adjust. The sitting room was to the left. I went in. The fireplace was cold, the grate holding a scatter of old ash and a half-burned log from the last time anyone had used it, 11 years ago at least. The stone surround was streaked with soot. There was a wing-back armchair pulled close to the hearth, a round side table beside it, and a writing desk against the wall between the 2 windows. A bookshelf, a braided rug, faded to near gray, everything under a thin, even layer of dust. I set my bag down by the armchair and opened the flue. It was stiff, but moved. I'd packed light supplies, instant coffee, canned soup, crackers, a flashlight, a wool blanket, and a bag of fat wood from the hardware store in Kellner's Mill, because it was October in Maine, and the only heat in the house was whatever the fireplace could provide. There was a log bin beside the hearth that still held wood, old and gray but dry. I built the fire more out of necessity than intention. It caught. The room shifted, warmth moving out from the hearth, the light changing, the shadows pulling back into the corners. And some tension I hadn't known I was carrying went out of my shoulders. Gran had kept this fireplace going every evening. That was a thing I remembered clearly. The sitting room always lit from the time the afternoon light started to fall until well after dinner. She had tended the fire the way some people tend a garden, with daily attention and no fuss about it. Watching the same fire come up in the same fireplace, I felt her absence in a way that was distinct from the general absence I'd carried for 11 years. This was the specific shape of her missing presence in this specific room. I had been 9 when I came to live with her. My parents had died in March, a car accident on a wet highway outside Augusta, and Gran had collected me from the neighbors where I'd been staying and brought me here. I'd spent summers here before the accident. After it, I stayed. The house had been safe for the whole length of my childhood, full of her cooking, her humming, the particular creak of the third stair. Standing now in her sitting room, doing the job of cataloging her belongings for sale felt like something I couldn't name. Professional, I told myself. 2 days. You can be sad about it in the car. I got out my inventory checklist and moved through the ground floor. The kitchen was through the hall and to the right of the staircase. The cast iron stove cold and dark, rust on the burner grates. The counters clear, everything put away. She'd been methodical, and she would have left the kitchen in order. The root cellar hatch was in the kitchen floor near the back wall, heavy wood with an iron latch and a thick ring handle. I noted it on the checklist and moved on. The downstairs bathroom, nothing notable. I went back to the hall and stood at the bottom of the stairs. The staircase turned at a landing halfway up. I could see the first few feet of the upstairs hallway from here. Pale wallpaper, closed doors, 4 rooms up there. Master bedroom at the top and to the right, 2 smaller rooms in the middle. And the east bedroom at the end of the hall, its door closed. I'd never been in the east bedroom, not once in all the summers I'd spent here. The door had always been closed, and I had never thought to ask why. Some things about a house you just accept when you're a child. I went up. The staircase had a specific sequence of sounds. The 3rd step, the 7th, the landing, groaning. And they were exactly as I remembered them. My body had stored them without being asked. At the top, I opened the master bedroom, looked in, noted what was there. The 2 smaller rooms, same, old furniture, old curtains, the smell of closed places. I stopped at the end of the hall. The east bedroom door was closed. There was something about it I couldn't have put into words. It looked the same as the other doors, same wood, same faded white paint, same tarnished brass knob. But I didn't open it. I stood there, and then I went back downstairs, and I didn't think too hard about why. Back in the sitting room, the fire had built up well. I went to the writing desk. 2 regular drawers on the right side, a larger central one. Pencils, old stamps, a rubber band that fell apart when I touched it. The bottom right drawer was locked. I tried the keys one at a time until the 5th one turned with a thin click. Inside was a single folded piece of paper, yellowed, folded 3 times into a small rectangle. My name was on the outside. Caleb. Written in my grandmother's handwriting. Her careful, even hand. The capital C with its particular loop. I picked it up and looked at it for a moment. Then I unfolded it. The paper was soft with age, the creases worn deep from being folded the same way for a long time. A single sheet, written on both sides. At the top, in slightly larger letters, rules for the house. Numbered 1 through 7. My first feeling, reading the first rule, was something close to fondness. This was entirely her. Organized lists, written down procedures, not leaving things to chance. Keep the sitting room fireplace lit from dusk to dawn. Do not let it go out under any circumstances. I'd already done that. Rule 1. Satisfied without knowing it. I read on. Rule 2 was about the east bedroom. Do not enter. If the door is open when you arrive, close it. Do not look into the east bedroom mirror under any circumstances. If the black cloth has fallen, do not replace it with your hands. Use the fireplace poker, and do not look at the glass while you do it. I noted that I hadn't opened the east bedroom door, that I'd stood at the end of the hall and just not opened it. Something had stopped me, and I'd let it. Rule 3. Do not speak the name of the previous tenant. You will find his name in documents in the house. Do not say it aloud. If you find yourself about to say it, stop. Leave the room. Breathe. It listens for its name the way the dead listen for their own. I reread that last sentence twice. Rules 4 and 5. The music box in the attic. The root cellar hatch. Rule 5 stopped me. Do not open the cellar hatch after dark. I do not know what it does down there. I only know that it goes there when it is not upstairs. I do not know what it does down there. I stood at the desk and looked at those words. My grandmother had written them. She had lived in this house for decades, and there were things in it she did not know, had decided she did not need to know, and she had written that sentence down anyway, so that whoever came after her would understand the shape of the ignorance, The practical limits of what could be known. Rule 6. Cover every mirror in the house before midnight. The east bedroom mirror is already covered. Cover the rest. Rule 7 was about morning. True light, not the gray before sunrise. Go directly to your car. Do not look back at the house from the driveway. It watches from the upstairs window when people leave. If you look back, it will know you are coming back. At the bottom of the page, below the 7th rule. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. Follow these. I love you. Gran. I stood there for a long time. There was a part of my mind that wanted to read this as the writing of a woman who had, in her last years alone in a remote house, become frightened and old and fixed on something that wasn't there. That was a reasonable explanation. People who lived alone developed habits that, written down and handed to someone else, looked like something they weren't. But this was not the writing of a frightened woman. The handwriting was steady. The same careful hand she'd always had, not cramped or rushed, not the scratching of someone in distress. There was no explanation in the rules, no preamble, no, I know this seems strange. Just the rules, precise and specific, written by someone who had decided that what was in the house could not be explained and that what mattered was the procedure. The difference between most doors and every door. Between going immediately and waiting 10 minutes. Those differences felt, in the specific language of the rules, like the difference between survivable and not. I folded the paper along its original creases and held it. I went to the kitchen and made instant coffee on the camp stove I'd brought. The kitchen was dark, the window over the sink a black mirror, my own reflection pale in it. I propped my flashlight on the counter and took my coffee back to the sitting room. Around 8:30, I heard something upstairs. A single creak, specific and weighted. Not the ambient complaint of old wood in changing temperatures. I knew that sound, had grown up with it. This had the quality of pressure applied through a single point, the way a floorboard sounds when someone's weight comes down on it. I set my cup on the side table, listened. Nothing followed it. I went to the bottom of the stairs and stood with my hand on the newel post. The upstairs hallway was dark and quiet. I turned on my flashlight and went up, the 3rd step and the 7th speaking as they always had, the landing groaning. The hallway was empty. Every door was closed. I checked the master bedroom, both smaller rooms, the bathroom. Empty, shower curtain pushed back, nothing behind it. I came back out and stood in the hall. The east bedroom door was closed at the end. I looked at it. I didn't go to it. I went back downstairs. I added wood to the fire. I read the rules a second time, standing at the desk, and this time I read them as instructions. I found the linen closet in the upstairs hall and pulled out 2 old sheets. The mirror in the master bedroom first. I draped the sheet over the frame and smoothed it flat. The bathroom mirror next. There was a small round mirror near the top of the stairs I hadn't noticed on my first pass. I covered it with a hand towel from the bathroom rack. I stood in the hall and looked at the east bedroom door. Rule 2 said the black cloth was already on that mirror. Rule 2 said do not enter. I did not enter. I went back downstairs and sat in the armchair with the rules on my knee and the fire going strong. Outside, the wind was moving through the spruce. The house was quiet in the way old houses are quiet, full of small sounds that were just the house, ambient and familiar, nothing behind them. I looked at the ceiling. At 9 o'clock, from directly above me, from the floor of the east bedroom, the sitting room ceiling between us, I heard it. A single footstep, slow and deliberate. Old wood taking a load it hadn't taken in a long time. Then silence. The fire burned. The wind pressed at the windows. I sat with my grandmother's rules in my lap and looked at the ceiling and thought about her handwriting. How steady it had been. How steady it had always been. She had lived in this house for decades. She had sat in this same chair. She had kept this same fire going every night from dusk to dawn, and I had thought it was just something she did. I understood now that nothing about the way she had lived here was just something she did. I looked at Rule 1 one more time. Then I added another log and sat back down and watched the fire and waited. The footstep didn't repeat. I sat in the armchair and waited for it, the way you wait for a second crack of thunder after the first. The fire was going, the room was warm, the house was quiet above me, and I sat there with the rules on my knee and counted to 63 times, and nothing came. Then I went upstairs anyway. I told myself I was being practical. I'd heard a sound, I'd checked, I'd found nothing. Going up a second time wasn't caution. It was what a man does when he can't quite let something go. I took the flashlight and went up slowly, the third step and the seventh doing what they always did, the landing groaning under my foot. The hallway was empty, every door closed, same as I'd left them. I moved the flashlight beam across the wallpaper, the closed doors, all the way to the end of the hall. The east bedroom door was open an inch. I know it had been closed. I'd stood at the end of that hall not 2 hours ago and looked at it, closed, and walked away. I hadn't opened it. No one had. It was a closed door in an empty house, and now it was open an inch. The gap just darkness, no light from inside, no sound. I didn't look through the gap. I walked to the end of the hall with my eyes on the door frame and put my hand flat on the edge of the door, not the knob, the painted wood edge, and pushed it shut until I felt the latch click. I took my hand away and stood there a second, listening. Nothing from inside. I went back downstairs. The cardboard file box from the estate lawyer had been sitting in the front hall since I arrived, labeled Marsh Estate, Harrow Ridge in black marker. Working with documents was something I knew how to do. I'd spent 15 years in a classroom handling primary sources, teaching other people how to pull meaning from old paper. I was considerably better with paper than I was with whatever else was happening in this house, and I needed something that felt like a task I actually understood. I pulled the lid off and went through the folders. Deeds going back to the original 1887 construction, property tax records through the 50s and 60s, a folder of personal correspondence, letters Gran had kept and bundled with a rubber band that snapped the moment I touched it. Household receipts. I went through it all steadily, separating anything of potential estate value from the paper record of a long life in one place. The third folder from the back was thicker than the rest. Inside, old administrative correspondence from county offices, early 1960s. Property notices, a surveying matter. Standard enough. About halfway through the folder, I found a letter that was different from the others. It was from the Harrow County Sheriff's Department, dated October 1961. A single paragraph, formal and brief. It referred to a boarder, a man who had been renting the east bedroom from Gran since April of that year. He hadn't been seen since early September. His belongings remained at the property. The department had found no evidence of foul play and was closing the matter as a voluntary departure. His name was in the second line of the letter. I almost read it aloud. It was a genuine almost. My mouth had started forming the first syllable the way it always did when I found something worth noting in a document, a habit 15 years of teaching had made automatic. I had half a breath in, and the shape of the first letter already on my lips before something stopped me. Not a deliberate thought. Something more like a reflex, the hand pulling back from heat before the brain registers the reason. I stopped, closed my mouth. Set the letter face down on the side table without finishing the line. I picked up the rules and found Rule 3. Do not speak the name of the previous tenant. You will find his name in documents in the house. Do not say it aloud. If you find yourself about to say it, stop. Leave the room. Breathe. It listens for its name, the way the dead listen for their own. I left the room, stood in the kitchen in the dark, and breathed. The kitchen smelled of cold iron and old stone, and underneath everything that other smell I still couldn't name. I breathed until my pulse settled. then went back, put the folder in the box, put the lid on, and pushed the box to the far side of the desk. I didn't go back into it. Around 10:30, the fire burned low. I'd been working through the documents and hadn't noticed it going down. Logs fading to coals without the crackle of fresh wood, the room dimming gradually. I adjusted to the dimness, the way you adjust to things that happen slowly, without registering the change until it was already done. That was when I became aware of the shape at the far end of the room. Not directly. It was peripheral, that part of vision that registers presence before the eyes can resolve what's there. Something tall and still near the hallway door, standing in the dark that had collected at the far wall while the fire was low. I didn't turn to look. Some instinct said that was the wrong move, and I was past arguing with my instincts. I kept my eyes on the coals and I reached for the log bin. 2 logs on. The flames took a minute to catch, the longest minute of the night so far. And during that minute, the dimness held and the shape held at the edge of my vision, still and patient and tall in a way that was slightly wrong. Then the logs caught. The room brightened, warmth pushing back out to the corners. When I let my eyes drift toward the hallway door, there was nothing there. I kept the fire high after that. A log every 20 minutes, whether it needed one or not. I was not going to let the room go dim again. The music box started at 12 past midnight. I heard it through the ceiling, coming from above the upstairs hallway. A thin, reedy melody I recognized immediately as the kind of sound a music box makes. Precise and slightly out of tune in the way old mechanisms go after enough years. A loop about 15 seconds long, repeating back to itself. Gran had mentioned it once. I was maybe 15, and she was standing at the kitchen counter not looking at me when she said it. The thing in the attic plays sometimes. I don't know why. She'd said it the way she'd mention a sticky window latch. One of those house things, nothing to worry about. I had forgotten it completely. Sitting here now, listening to it play, I understood that she had known exactly why, had always known, and had framed it that way because that was how you managed it when someone you loved was in the house and you needed them to stay calm. She had been protecting me even then, on ordinary afternoons, without my knowing there was anything to protect me from. I got up and found Rule 4. If the music box in the attic begins to play, close every interior door in the house before going upstairs. Every door. Do not go into the attic until the music stops. When it stops, wait 10 minutes. Then, and only then, you may go up. Every door. Not most. Every. I started with the kitchen door, pulled it shut, heard the latch. Downstairs bathroom, same. The sitting room door gave me a pause because closing it put the fire on the other side and left the hallway dark. I closed it anyway. The rule said every door, and the rule had a reason, and I was past the point of deciding which parts I trusted. I went upstairs. The music was louder up here, coming from the hatch directly overhead. I moved quickly. Master bedroom, latched. Both small bedrooms, closed. Bathroom, closed. The east bedroom door was already closed. I put my palm flat against the wood, not the knob, just the flat of my hand against the painted surface, confirmed the latch and moved on. 6 minutes, door to door. The music was still going. I stood under the attic hatch and waited. The melody ran its loop. 15 seconds. Back to the start. 15 seconds. I had decided I was not going to be the man who couldn't follow a simple instruction when it mattered. I counted the loops, and I waited. The music stopped at 12:31. No fade, no wind down. Just stopped, mid-loop. I checked my watch and waited 10 minutes. The house was completely silent for all of them, which was in some ways worse than if it hadn't been. At 12:41, I pulled the hatch down. The attic was low and close, the air thick with insulation dust, smelling of old wood and years. Boxes under tarps, covered furniture. The steamer trunk near the center of the space, and on top of it, exactly where the rule had said it would be, the music box. Wooden, inlaid panels on the sides, a brass fitting on the lid. Old. The lid was closed. It had been playing a minute ago with the lid closed, and I did not touch it to find out how that worked. I swept the flashlight around the space methodically. Boxes in the near corners, a covered chair, a second trunk against the far wall, a lamp on the floor without its shade. The roofline came down low at the far end, narrowing the space to maybe 4 feet. I moved the beam into the far corner. Something was standing there, not furniture, not boxes stacked tall, something with the proportions of a person. The head near the low slope of the roofline, arms at its sides, facing the corner with its back to me. The flashlight was on it for less than 2 seconds before I moved the beam away. I didn't sweep it back to confirm. I turned around, went down the folding stairs 1 step at a time, and pulled the hatch shut behind me. The latch clicked. I stood in the dark hallway with my back to the hatch and breathed through my nose until my heart came down to something manageable. Then I went downstairs. The fire had held. I opened the sitting room door and stood for a moment in the warmth from it before going in, sitting down and putting 2 more logs on. I held the rules until my hands steadied. 12:30 a.m. Rule 6. Cover every mirror in the house before midnight. I was past midnight. The upstairs mirrors were done. I'd covered those before 9. What remained was downstairs. I covered the bathroom mirror with a hand towel, eyes down, not looking at the glass. Then I went to the kitchen. I stood in the doorway. The kitchen was dark except for the glow from the sitting room behind me. The window over the sink was a black rectangle, and in it I could see the kitchen reflected. The counter, the stove, the doorway where I stood. I started across the room toward it. I was already looking. The reflection showed me in the doorway, pale and tired. And at the kitchen doorway behind my reflection, not in the actual room but in the window's version of it, where everything is flipped and slightly wrong, a figure. Tall, arms at its sides, the hands hanging a fraction too low. Its face turned toward the glass. The eyes were a fraction too wide. The mouth was too still. The rest of the face was almost right, close enough that for a single second I had the dizzying impression that I was looking at someone I should recognize. I turned away. I found a dish towel in the drawer by feel and covered the glass. Pressed the edges flat. Stepped back. Did not look at it again. I went back to the armchair. Sat down. The fire was high, the room bright, and I held the rules in my lap and looked at the firelight and thought about Gran sitting here doing exactly this. Evening after evening, the fire, the mirrors, the distance, alone. What it cost to keep a life inside those limits. What you would have to stop feeling to do it year after year, with no one to tell and nowhere to go and the thing in the house always there. She had done it alone. For decades. The clock on the mantel said 12:47. I sat back in the armchair and watched the door and tried not to think about whether the figure in the kitchen window had been standing there before I walked in, or whether it had moved there when it heard me coming. I covered the kitchen window with a dish towel and did not look at it again. Then I went back to the sitting room and sat down in the armchair and did not move for 20 minutes. My hands were shaking. Not badly. Not the kind of shaking you can't control, but enough that I noticed it. Enough that I held the rules page in both hands and felt the paper tremble slightly. I had seen something in that window. A face that was almost a face. Eyes that were a fraction too wide. It had been looking at me from the wrong side of the glass, from the reflection's version of the doorway, and I had turned away after 1 second, and I was not going back into that kitchen until daylight. I put both remaining logs from the bin on the fire at once and built it as high as it would safely go. The room got bright. The shadows pulled all the way back. I sat in the center of the light and breathed. The clock on the mantel said 1:03 a.m. when I heard something in the cellar. It came from below the kitchen floor. I could hear it even from the sitting room. Through the hallway, a slow and deliberate sound. Not loud, not frantic, just something moving in a confined space. The particular noise of weight shifting on a dirt floor. Stone walls carry sound differently than wood. I'd been in root cellars before. I knew what they sounded like when they were occupied. I got up and went to the kitchen doorway. I didn't go in. I stood in the doorway and looked at the hatch in the floor. The hatch was closed. The iron latch was down in its bracket. I could hear the movement below it, unhurried, the way you move when you're not trying to go anywhere. Just present, just there. I went back to the desk and found Rule 5. Do not open the cellar hatch after dark. I do not know what it does down there. I only know that it goes there when it is not upstairs, and that the two states are mutually exclusive. As long as the hatch is closed, it cannot be in both places at once. I read it twice. Then I understood what it meant in a way I hadn't quite gotten before, standing in the sitting room reading it the first time. The hatch being closed wasn't a barrier. It wasn't keeping anything in. It was keeping track of where something was. If it was in the cellar, it was not upstairs. The hatch was a location, not a lock. And the location was confirmed, below the kitchen floor, moving slowly, not going anywhere. Which meant it was not at the top of the stairs, not in the east bedroom, not in the hall. I went back to the armchair. I kept the fire high. I did not go near the kitchen, and I did not touch the cellar hatch, and I listened to the sounds from below for a while. And then they stopped, around 1:30 or so, and the house went quiet, and I sat in the armchair with the rules and waited. At 1:45, I needed to use the bathroom. I had been ignoring this for a while, the way you ignore physical needs when you're afraid, rationing your attention for the things that matter more. But there's a limit to that, and I reached it. The downstairs bathroom was through the hall, past the foot of the stairs. I could get there without going near the kitchen. I picked up the flashlight, picked up the poker from where it leaned against the armrest. I'd started carrying it from room to room at some point without thinking about it, and went out into the hallway. I was halfway to the bathroom when I looked up the stairs. I don't know why I looked. Some instinct, the same instinct that makes you check a dark window at night, even when you don't want to see what might be there. I looked up the staircase, past the landing, to the upstairs hallway above. At the far end of the hall, where the hallway ended at the east bedroom door, something was standing. Tall, facing the wall. Back to me. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there at the end of the hall with its back to the east bedroom door, the way a person stands when they're waiting for someone to open a door. It didn't turn around. It didn't do anything. It stood, and I stood, and neither of us moved. I counted to about 120, roughly 2 minutes. It did not move once. I backed down the 2 steps I'd come up, slowly, keeping my eyes on the upstairs hallway until the landing cut off my sight line. Then I went to the downstairs bathroom. I did not go back upstairs for the rest of the night. Back in the armchair, I sat with the poker across my knees and tried to think straight. It was almost 2 a.m. Dawn was, I checked, around 5:45. 6 at the outside for true light. 4 hours. I could do 4 hours. I'd done worse in a classroom at the end of a long week. I just had to keep the fire going and keep the doors closed and not open the cellar hatch and not say anything I shouldn't say and not look at anything I shouldn't look at. I needed something to do with my hands. That was the problem. Sitting still in the armchair was making it worse. Every small sound the house made was taking up too much space in my head, and the sounds the house made were not small. Somewhere upstairs, the floorboards were settling with a regularity that was too steady to be ambient. I knew what ambient sounded like. This wasn't it. I pulled the document box back toward me. I shouldn't have. I knew I shouldn't have. But the documents were the task. The task was what I'd come here to do, and doing the task was the closest thing I had to feeling normal at 2:30 in the morning in my dead grandmother's house. So I pulled the box toward me, and I went back into the folders, and I was careful. I was being careful. I knew the name was in there, and I was going to skip past any document that referenced it. I was going to be methodical about this the way I was methodical about everything. I found a letter from 1963. It was a formal notice from the town of Harrow Ridge, something about unclaimed personal effects left at the property. The language was administrative, dry, exactly the kind of document I'd read 1,000 times in historical research. I was skimming. I was tired. It was 2:30 in the morning, and I'd been awake since 5 the previous day, and my guard was down in the specific, incremental way that tiredness lowers a guard. Not all at once, just a fraction at a time until you don't notice the deficit. The letter referred to the tenant by his full name in the second paragraph. I read it aloud. It was barely a whisper. Just the automatic murmur of a tired man reading a document the way he'd read 10,000 documents before. In classrooms and libraries and quiet offices, his voice dropping to the register of someone thinking out loud. I got through the whole name before I even registered that I was speaking. In reference to the personal effects of Thomas Vale, I stopped. I put the letter down. I looked up. The fire dropped. It was a single dip. One moment bright, the next a fraction lower, the flames pulling in on themselves for just a second before recovering. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but in those 2 seconds the room went dark enough that the shape at the far wall was visible again, more clearly than I had seen it at 10:30 when the fire burned low. It was standing near the hallway door, and it was taller than before, or it felt taller, and it was more present, the way a sound is more present when the room goes quiet around it. Then the fire came back up. Then the music box started. It was louder this time. I could hear it clearly from the sitting room. The same melody as before, the same 15-second loop, but with a volume behind it that the first time hadn't had. And underneath it, or alongside it, I heard the east bedroom door. Not the sound of a door blown by a draft. The sound of a door handle being turned. The specific mechanical sound of a latch bolt retracting. And then the door swinging open on hinges with 60 years of rust in them, slow and deliberate. The creak of it carrying down through the house to where I sat. Heavy footsteps. Upstairs. Moving in the hall. I was on my feet before I'd decided to stand up. Every door. Rule 4 said every door, and I hadn't followed Rule 4 because the music box had started without warning this time. Not like before when I'd had a moment to prepare, and the footsteps were moving in the hall above me, and I had no time and no plan, and I moved anyway. Kitchen door. I pulled it shut as I went past. Downstairs bathroom. I hit it closed without stopping. I ran the interior of the ground floor in maybe 45 seconds, and got every door on the ground floor latched except the sitting room door. And I left that one open because the fire was in the sitting room, and the firelight was the only thing in the hallway, and if I closed the sitting room door, the hallway went completely dark, and whatever was at the top of the stairs would be at the top of a dark staircase in a dark hallway, and I was not going to be on the other side of a closed door from that light source. The footsteps stopped. I stood at the sitting room doorway and looked at the bottom of the staircase. 3 steps visible from where I stood, then the landing, then nothing. I could hear the music box still going upstairs. I could hear the house around me, the way it sounded with something large and awake in it. The pressure had changed. It was the only way I could describe it. The air in the house felt different after the name, the way air feels different when a storm is close. Nothing came down the stairs. I went back to the armchair. I sat facing the hallway. I put the poker across my knees. The fire was behind me, and I kept my back to it so the heat was on my shoulders and the light was in front of me, lighting the hallway, lighting the bottom of the stairs, and I sat like that, and I watched the stairs, and I did not move. The music stopped sometime around 2:45. It just stopped the same way it had stopped the first time. One moment playing, the next moment not. The footsteps didn't come back. At 3 a.m., the voice came. It wasn't from upstairs. It wasn't from the hallway. It was from inside the walls. The same walls I was sitting between, the plaster and lath of a house built in 1887, and the voice came out of them the way sound comes out of a radio with poor reception, low and even, like someone speaking slowly in a room just on the other side of the wall. It said my name, just my name, Caleb, once. I pressed my lips together and stared at the fire and said nothing. Rule 3 didn't say anything about this specifically. It was about speaking the tenant's name, not about responding to your own. But the logic held. Acknowledgement was an invitation. Everything in the rules, when you read them carefully, came back to that one principle. Don't acknowledge it. Don't invite it. Keep the distance. I said nothing. The voice did not come again. I sat in the armchair and I held the rules and I looked at the fire and I thought about Gran. Not the way I'd thought about her earlier in the night, with the grief of loss, the specific ache of her absence in a room where she'd been present. This was different. I was thinking about what it had cost her. She had sat in this same armchair. I knew she had. It was placed just right for the firelight, just right for watching the hallway. And the voice had said her name too, probably, through these same walls. On nights when she'd made mistakes, when something had slipped, when the distance had closed further than it should have, she had sat here and held whatever she held, her mending, her book, her own version of these rules, and she had not answered. For years. Alone. I read the rules a fourth time. I read them slowly, every word, and when I got to the bottom of the page, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. Follow these. I love you. I held the paper still and kept my face steady and breathed through my nose. She had known she couldn't tell me. She had known that whatever she'd learned in this house, you couldn't hand it to another person in conversation. You couldn't explain it. You could only leave instructions for the moment when the person who loved you came back to the house and found themselves needing to know. The instructions were why I was still here. At 3:30, I checked the time and looked at the hallway. The footsteps had retreated. I'd heard them go back at some point, moving away from the top of the stairs, back down the upstairs hall. The music had stopped. The voice had said its single word and gone quiet. The fire was holding. I had the poker and the rules, and every door in the house was closed, except the one behind me, and the light from the fire was going out into the dark hallway and reaching the foot of the stairs. I looked at the gap under the sitting room door. There was a strip of light from the fire falling through it onto the hallway floor, and in that strip of light, at the far side, coming from the bottom of the door at the base of the staircase, a shadow shifted. Not dramatically, not a lunge or a rush, just a slow shift, the way a shadow moves when the thing casting it moves slightly in one direction. Something standing at the top of the stairs, standing still, casting a shadow down through the staircase to the hallway floor, and that shadow visible as a thin, dark line in the strip of firelight under my door. It was closer than it had been an hour ago. I didn't know how I knew that. Something about the angle of the shadow, or the density of it. It had moved while I wasn't watching. I thought about the rules. Rule 7. At first light. True light, not the gray before sunrise. I checked my watch. An hour and a half until gray. 2 hours, maybe a little more, until true light. I put another log on the fire and sat back down and watched the strip of light under the door and waited. The shadow under the door shifted again at 3:42 a.m. I watched it from the armchair. Just a thin, dark line in the strip of firelight at the base of the sitting room door, moving the way a shadow moves when the thing casting it shifts its weight from one foot to the other. Slow. Patient. It had been there since 3:30, and it hadn't come toward me, and it hadn't gone away. I checked the fire. The log from 3:30 was burning down faster than I wanted. The bin beside the hearth still had wood. I'd brought in an armful from the back porch when I arrived, before any of this started, back when carrying in firewood was just a practical thing to do in October. I counted what was left. 4 logs, roughly 5 hours until true light, and 4 logs to get there. I put one on at 3:45 and told myself to be careful. The wood pile was on the back porch, outside, in the dark, and I was not going outside. Rule 1 said keep the fire lit. I had 4 logs and I was going to make them last until dawn, and I was not going out through the kitchen in the dark for more. 4 logs. I set them in my mind like a countdown and sat back and watched the door. The shadow was still there. At 4 a.m., the door handle moved. I was watching the gap underneath it when it happened, and the handle was in my peripheral view. It turned slowly, the way a handle moves when someone on the other side is trying to be quiet about it, pressing down by degrees rather than in one motion. The latch bolt retracted. The door drifted inward 2 inches, then stopped. The hallway beyond was dark. The fire was behind me, and its light went through the open doorway and died, not reaching far enough to show me anything. Just dark. And a door that had opened 2 inches on its own and stopped. I picked up the poker. I did not look directly at the door. I picked up the 2 logs I'd been saving and put them both on the fire at once. I knew I was burning through my reserve faster than I should. I did it anyway. The fire surged. The logs caught quickly. The room brightened. And in my peripheral view, the door moved again, slowly, drifting back toward the frame. The latch clicked shut. I sat with the poker across my knees and did not move for a long time. At 4:20, the cellar hatch. I heard it from the sitting room. Not the hatch opening, but the latch. A metallic sound, low and repetitive, the iron bracket vibrating in its stay the way it would if something on the other side was pressing upward. Sustained, not a single impact. I went to the kitchen doorway. The hatch was still closed. The latch was moving, the iron bar working against the bracket in a slow, rhythmic way. The hatch itself held. I looked at it and thought about Rule 5 and thought about what it meant that it was down there again after being quiet for nearly 3 hours. The kitchen chairs were at the table. I pulled them over one at a time, 3 of them, and stacked them on top of the hatch. The legs settled against the wood. The latch kept moving underneath. I went back to the sitting room and closed the kitchen door behind me and sat down. The latch stopped after a few minutes. I had 2 logs left. I want to be honest about what those next 20 minutes were like. Every minute between 4:20 and 4:40 was its own separate thing. The fire burning, the poker in my hands, the 2 logs left in the bin. I kept checking the time, and the time kept moving at the same pace it always moves, and there was nothing I could do to speed it up. The music box started at 4:40. Louder than either time before. I could hear it clearly from the sitting room without straining. The same loop, but with a volume that meant whatever was playing it had stopped making any effort to be subtle. And then, underneath the music, a sound I hadn't heard before. The attic hatch coming down, the ceiling panel dropping, the hinges swinging, the folding stairs unfolding and locking into place. And then the sound of something descending to the top of the attic stairs and stopping there, not coming all the way down, just there, at the top. I was already at the sitting room door. I closed it from my side and held it. Both hands braced, the poker pushed through the handle to keep it from turning. The music box ran its loop, again and again. Something was at the top of the attic stairs. The sitting room door was the only thing I had. I held it. At 4:50, the voice came back. From inside the room, from the walls, same as at 3 a.m. But this time not once, and not just my name. Caleb. A pause. Caleb. And then, Thomas says to open the door. Thomas is waiting. Thomas knows your name now too. I pressed my forehead against the door. My teeth were together and I was breathing through them in short pulls. The door was cold against my forehead. The fire was warm on my back. I thought about Gran. not in an abstract way. I thought about her in this room, specifically the armchair, the fireplace, the writing desk where she'd written those 7 rules in that steady handwriting. I thought about the voice saying her name through these same walls on nights when she'd made mistakes and the distance had closed. That she'd pressed her lips together and not answered. That she'd done this alone for years after I stopped coming here, after there was no one left to protect. She'd stayed anyway. She'd stayed and held the distance and kept the rules and never said a word about any of it because you couldn't explain it. You could only leave instructions for whoever came after. Those instructions were in my jacket pocket, and they were the only reason I was still standing. I held the door and I said nothing. At 4:55 a.m., 1 log left. I'd lost count somewhere between the door handle and the cellar hatch. I crossed the room fast, letting go of the door, not looking back at it. Put the log on and went back. It caught. The fire held. 1 log. I did the math. Dawn around 5:45, 5:48 at the outside. It was 4:55 now. 50 minutes. A good dry log could run 50 minutes. It had to. The voice didn't come again after 4:50. The music box ran past 5, past 5:10, then stopped the way it always stopped. Abruptly, mid-loop. Silence from above. The attic stairs were still down. I could hear it in the way the house sounded, but nothing was moving up there. I held the door. At 5:15, the dark in the windows changed. Not light, just the absolute black turning to something a few shades less than absolute. A cold blue-gray, the color the sky goes when the night has finished, but the sun hasn't started. Rule 7 was specific. True light, not the gray before sunrise. I knew the difference it was drawing. I stayed at the door. The fire was going to coals. I watched the window and I waited for the color in the glass to change from that cold blue-gray to something with warmth in it. Light that came from a direction rather than just the absence of dark. The shadow under the door had been gone since sometime after 4:50. I waited. At 5:48 a.m., the east-facing window went pale gold. The window beside the writing desk, facing the tree line. The light that came through it was low and flat, the color of a candle's edge. Not bright yet, but light with color in it, light from the sun. October morning in Maine, late arriving and early leaving. I read Rule 7 one more time. At first light. True light, not the gray before sunrise, but the first actual light through the windows. You may leave. Go directly to your car. Do not go back inside for anything you left behind. Do not look back at the house from the driveway. I set the rules on the desk. Then I picked them up and folded them along the old creases and put them in my jacket pocket. I picked up my bag from the armchair. I'd set it there when I first arrived, before the rules, before any of it, when putting a bag down in an armchair was just a thing you did when you came in a door. It felt like a long time ago. I pulled the poker out of the door handle, set it against the wall. I opened the sitting room door. The hallway was empty, gray morning light through the narrow window beside the front door, enough to see by. The front door was straight ahead. The staircase was to my right, and I did not look up it. The kitchen doorway was to my left, and I did not look toward it. I went down the hallway. The front door opened on the second try, the lock stiff from years of no use, same as when I'd come in. I pushed through and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit immediately. October in Maine before the sun clears the tree line, the kind that gets in under your collar. The spruce and birch were coming into shape in the early light. The second porch step sagged under my foot the same way it had the night before. I walked across the gravel to the car. My legs wanted to run and I didn't let them, not because I was calm, but because running felt like it would mean something about what I was leaving behind. I walked across the gravel and got in and started the engine. I drove down the driveway toward the county road. The trees pressed in close on both sides, the same as when I'd driven in, the channel of overgrown driveway pale in the new light. I kept my eyes on the road. I did not look in the rear-view mirror. I did not look back at the house. I drove to the end of the gravel and stopped the car at the asphalt. I sat there. Long enough to feel the engine running and the heat coming on and the world outside being just a country road in early morning. Ordinary, with no sound except wind. The rules were on the passenger seat. I picked them up and folded them along the creases they already had and put them in my jacket pocket. Then I pulled onto the county road and drove toward Kellner's Mill. The diner opened at 6. I got there just after 6:20 and sat in a booth in the back and ordered coffee. When it came, I held the mug with both hands because my hands were not yet steady. I sat for a while before I took out my phone. I called the estate lawyer. I told her I wouldn't be selling the property. I told her to file whatever kept it off the market indefinitely, closed, no access, and I'd cover the costs. She asked me why. She had a right to ask. I didn't answer that question. I paid for the coffee and drove back to Portland. I've thought a lot about what my grandmother knew and when she knew it. I've thought about her living in that house alone for 11 years after she stopped having anyone to protect. Her daughter gone, me grown and in Portland, no reason to stay. She stayed anyway. I think she stayed because she knew what would happen if the house sat empty. No fire in the fireplace, no one following the rules, nothing keeping the distance. The house is still there. I pay the property taxes. I keep the utilities on so the pipes don't freeze. I haven't been back. Sometimes, late at night, I hear a sound from the walls of my apartment. A slow, deliberate creak, like a footstep in an old house. It's probably nothing. Old buildings settle. I know that. I cover my mirrors anyway.